This has been an emotional week. It's been an emotional week for us as a nation, and it's also been an emotional week in the life of this church. As many of you may know, one of the saints of the church joined the great cloud of witnesses just a few short days ago. And I know that in the midst of a pandemic, it is hard for us to gather together to share in mourning and in celebration of a life. And so in honor and in memory of Carl Gotze, I talked with his wife Ramona to find out what hymns he really loved. And I've taken a couple of those favorite hymns of Carl's and woven them together along with one of the hymns of the church that I find myself going back to time and time again when things feel hopeless or lost or confusing. It's a hymn that reminds me, that reminds us that we are held by God in the midst of turmoil, in the midst of fear. God is never far from us. And so I offer these hymns of assurance in the wake of a tumultuous week and in memory of Carl Gotze.
Welcome, young and old, gay and straight, married, single, bisexual, transgender, welcome. People of all colors, cultures, and abilities, welcome. Noisy, wiggly babies and children of all ages, welcome. Rich and poor, powerful and weak, believers and questioners and questioning believers, welcome. Welcome, all you who seek God's graceful, open-hearted love and the beautiful new world that love makes possible. Welcome to Brentwood Christian Church.
Hey, cool kids. I wanted to give you a follow-up on the story I told last week about the two rowdy boys that had joined my perfect classroom, and how I wasn't handling their behavior very well. I was yelling and tense and anxious, and that showed in my teaching, and it invaded the rest of the class who I had grown to appreciate and love and relaxed with until these two rowdy boys joined the classroom. Last week I said that I was just going to relax when Monday came around. Well, Monday came around, the first day after our winter break, and I relaxed. And the two rowdy boys were still rowdy. But as the week went on, I tried really hard to establish a relationship with them. And now we are best buddies. They want to sit by me when we have silent reading time. They want to help me demonstrate any lessons that need to be demonstrated. And they are still rowdy, but what I have learned is that they had a lesson to teach me. Or rather, I had a lesson that I needed to learn. And these two rowdy boys taught me a great lesson. And that is that there is a kernel of beauty and love and grace in everybody. And even though people might seem very difficult, and people are difficult, there is still a kernel of God's love and beauty within each person. And fortunately, I was able to see that in these boys, and I can now appreciate them for who they are and for who they will grow into be. And I am the one who is lucky, and I am the one who had the lesson to learn, and I am deeply humbled by it. So I want you to remember that when you're around somebody who seems particularly difficult to be around, try to look for the kernel of beauty in them, because everybody has a kernel of beauty in them. So until we can meet again, remember, God is with us in the morning when the sun comes up. God is with us during the day when we run and jump and play. God is with us at night when we close our eyes to sleep. God is always with us. And God is always with you, my friends. And I love you lots.
Good morning and welcome to Brentwood Christian Church. Emily and I are beginning a series of conversations this week, and we are looking forward to using these conversations as a time for us to build community together as the church. One of the things that we're really interested in trying to do here in 2021 is to think about the ways that even though we meet virtually, how we might still feel part of a participatory community. Engaging in a worship service online, it's not the same as being in person, of course, and there's no substitute for a lot of things we can do in person, but we want to try to find ways that we can still feel like we are connected to our friends and neighbors here in our beloved community of Brentwood Christian Church. And so we are going to be doing a few things to begin the 2021 year, and part of that includes a new series that we're starting this morning. It's called A Great Cloud of Witnesses, Voices from the Church Then and Now. And what we're going to be doing on a weekly basis is to take a look at voices from the great traditions of the church who are kind of viewed as saints or heroes within the context of church history. So for example, this morning, we're going to look at Francis and Clare. And then also, though, we're going to pair that with a conversation with a member of the Brentwood community. And so we'll be able to talk about great leadership from the church's past with these saints and these heroes. But we're also going to be talking about, and we'll also be talking with folks who are part of Brentwood's community here and now. So we look forward to engaging in those conversations. Also, we want to give you some opportunities to participate from home. We're going to start up what is called the Book of Common Prayers. And our Book of Common Prayers is going to be an opportunity for each of us on a weekly basis to participate in our weekly worship. And you will be able to do these exercises at home, and there'll be a different one for each week. It could be writing a prayer, it could be doing your own translation of a biblical passage, and then we will share these with one another during our worship service. And again, that's a way for us to feel connected and part of a community. Also, but wait, there's more. If you would like to be a worship leader, if you want to read scripture during our worship service, if you would like to share a prayer during our worship service, let us know. You can email us, and we will give you ways that you can participate that way, because I really think it's important. I think people really enjoy seeing faces from our community, because we miss each other a lot, and we don't get to see each other very much. And so the more we can see faces from our community, the better. So we hope you will consider participating in that. Also, I'm going to begin a study group on the book Tears We Cannot Stop by Michael Eric Dyson. And it's going to be on Facebook. It'll convene online, and so you can participate whenever you want. It'll just be a little Facebook group, and I'm going to just ask some question prompts, and we'll be reading the same chapters out of the same book together. It'll just be a chance for us to be in conversation and dialogue together, again, to try to experience community in these times. This has been a hard week for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
Emily and I are recording this on Thursday, the day after all of the tumultuous activity in Washington, D.C. And our hearts are really heavy, from that for a variety of reasons. But also, our church family lost just a dear soul, Carl Godsey. Carl was a beloved saint of this church. He was a pillar of this church. He and his wife Ramona have been members of Brentwood since I think 1963. And they've been part of this church through ups and downs, through thick and thin, providing so much leadership. And there's a void in our hearts that can never be replaced. Carl's someone that, I've known Carl longer than I've been at Brentwood. Mm-hmm. We've known, each other going back over 20 years. I know you've known Carl for about 20 years. Mm-hmm. And he was always there for us.
Yeah.
There are times when things are hard in leadership, and people come along the way and they encourage you. And he was one of those people. And he had kind of a tough exterior, but as one person mentioned, a teddy bear heart. And he's been our board leader, elder, property. I mean, there's not a job he hasn't had in this church. And Carl passed in the early morning of Wednesday, and our hearts go out to Ramona, to his whole family. His nephew and niece are Lou and Indra Haken. And we'll miss Carl. The songs that Emily put together for our service were a little medley of songs that he especially loved. So Carl's part of that great cloud of witnesses now. And our hearts will forever be indebted to him, and the Spirit of Christ will forever keep us united to him. And as we begin this series, we've been planning this for some time, and then to learn about Carl's passing the day before we begin our first conversation about the saints and voices from the church then and now, it hit me pretty strong.
Yeah.
We are talking about Francis and Claire. On Wednesday, Speaker Pelosi invoked the prayer of St. Francis to try to bring calm, to try to bring peace in a really difficult time. And in a bit, Emily's going to share that song with you. It's a prayer of St. Francis that's attributed to him, set to music, and Emily's going to share that. It's one that will likely be very familiar to you, and we just wanted to share a bit about these heroes of the faith. And do you want to tell us a bit about Francis and Claire?
Yeah, so it's been said that St. Francis is one of the most influential saints in the church, of those who lived past biblical times. Probably Jesus would be pretty influential there, Paul, but as far as like people who came later, St. Francis really had a huge impact on the church. And St. Claire was one who followed in his footsteps and was inspired by St. Francis. So Francis was born, he wasn't born Francis. I think it was Giovanni or something, yeah. But I think he got the name Francesco when he was a baby, like they started calling him that. So anyway, that's how he became Francis. But he was born like in 1181, 82. Records from back then are not always completely accurate. But he grew up in a, fairly, I think it was in the merchant class. So the family was well off enough. And he, enjoyed parties and hanging out with his friends, and kind of like a lot of us when we're when we're young. And but he did go to fight in, I think he fought in a couple different wars. But he had some experiences that really changed him. And I know there was one experience where there was a beggar that was asking him for money, and I think Francis ended up giving him what he had. But there's just this transformation and encounter with Christ that Francis had. He had a vision of Jesus saying, effectively, repair my church. And so that Francis took that literally and did some work to repair some of the crumbling buildings and chapels that had been around in his area. But he really took, much to his father's chagrin, his father did not appreciate that he was giving money, and I think even the clothes, he take all his clothes off at one point just to declare his poverty. I can't remember, but there's a lot of stuff about Francis that's kind of the stuff of legends, right? But he declared a vow of poverty, and the rule that guided his order was I have it written here, to follow the teachings of our Lord Jesus Christ and to walk in his footsteps. It was a pretty simple rule. And I don't know that there's a simpler way to describe what we're called to as followers of Christ. It's kind of interesting. He was, when he first started his order, he initially had 11 followers who had joined him on that. But his order grew, and the way Claire came into the picture, she would have been about 12 years younger than him, and she was born into nobility. Her father had castles and such, But she went to a service and heard Francis speak and was very moved by that. And so she decided that she wanted to devote her life to Christ and learn more from Francis. And so she went and, did she join an abbey? She cut off all her hair and, was wearing very simple, plain clothes. Her father came to retrieve her and try to take her back. And she said, no, that's not what she was going to do. She was going to live this new life. And actually, I think her mother and her sister ended up joining her. Her mother joined her after her husband died, and her sister joined her as well. But Claire, one of the remarkable things about Claire is she was the first woman to write a rule for an order. So that's pretty remarkable about Claire. And I was reading something in this great book, it's Mysticism and Social Transformation. So I was reading, it kind of pulls out some different aspects of Claire and Francis than what we often read. But they talked about how Francis called Claire's order, was it the Poor Ladies, I think? And she always referred to it as the Poor Sisters. So there was this kind of, I don't know, it just seems like Claire kind of had a little bit of fire in her, perhaps. So.
Yeah. A lot of times, so like Francis is known a lot for being a leader and living a life of simplicity, also care for creation.
Blessing of the animals.
He's known to preach to the birds, and so the blessing of the animals that churches do oftentimes follows a Franciscan kind of order. So the Franciscan movement, that's the order that was connected to Francis. And he was also determined. So a lot of people think about him as being meek and mild, because of his love for creation, preaching to the birds, things like that. But determined. As I was thinking about Francis and Claire, I thought a little bit about Stacey Abrams. She is just determined to make a difference. Stacey Abrams would see structures that were in need of repair, and she was determined to make a transformative difference. And when I think about what Francis and Claire were doing in relationship to the church back in their day, they were determined to make a transformative difference. And so Francis is just really interesting. He lived within the context of the church, and yet he had all kinds of criticisms of the church. And so he had this love for Jesus and the things that Jesus calls us toward. And yet at the same time, he was really frustrated by what he saw as the institutional trappings of church. Instead of caring about the things that Jesus was about, he thought the church oftentimes was more concerned with wealth and power. And so Francis really wanted to reform the church. And he didn't do that as an outsider. He did it as an insider. And it reminds me of this one quote from a theologian I like by the name of Peter Rollins. He says that the Christian is one who... Sorry, I need to start this again. The Christian is one who is, in the moment of being a Christian, that is to say, standing in a particular tradition, also the one who rejects it, remembering the prophets of old who warned us about how any tradition could become idolatrous, betraying it, and get this, betraying it as an act of deep fidelity. So in other words, you are faithful to the gospel of Jesus, sometimes by calling the church to account because it is failing to live up to that gospel of Jesus. And Francis and Claire were absolutely determined to see the church reform, refigure, change, so that it more readily exemplified what Jesus was about.
Well, and one of the heart, we talked about simplicity, but it's more than just simplicity, it was also poverty. That was at the heart of the order for both St. Francis and for St. Claire. They both took that poverty very seriously. Claire talked, in her writings, she writes about the mirror, and she talks about what you see in the mirror, and that at the edges of the mirror you see the poverty of one born in a manger. of one who lived without a home, who lived poor throughout his life, and who died naked on a cross. And just lifting up the fact that it wasn't, Jesus was not rich in possessions. Jesus, that was not what was driving the ministry of Christ, and yet you see the church and all its trappings, and that clearly is not being conveyed in the way the church is being carried out in practice.
At least back then.
Right
I mean,
then.
it's all fixed now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. No. And it was similar with Francis. I mean, that vow of poverty was essential to following in the footsteps of Christ.
Yeah. I love the way they were ordinary people. Mm-hmm. And there was some wealth that they came from.
And wealth that their families were really horrified that they were rejecting.
Yeah.
I mean, both of them experienced, Francis especially, it sounds like there was quite some abuse that happened in the wake of him rejecting the wealth of his family. But I mean, both of them had family members that were very resistant to this new way and this new life they wanted to live, because they saw it as a rejection. I mean, I would imagine maybe a rejection of everything that they were, or, it's really complicated. But I mean, that takes, when you're talking about determination, I mean, that takes a lot of strength and courage to stand in opposition to what your family is wanting, because you feel this call that is bigger than that.
Yeah. And the gospel sometimes, and for Francis and Claire, it took up their whole life. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just this little part of their life. Mm-hmm. It was their whole life. Mm-hmm. And there are very few people that you kind of look at in history that seem to live with the same kind of radical, whatever. I mean, I don't know what the word is. The radical approach to living that you see, like in the person of Jesus. Very few people dare to follow in his footsteps. Like there's some things that really we can admire and things that inspire us, mm-hmm. and we try to move in that direction. And then there are some folks that really just give up their entire lives for it.
Right.
And, there's a song I remember from years ago about there's a freedom we find from the things we leave behind. And you see that in Francis and Claire's life. It, like, by all accounts, people looking at them, they're giving up everything. And yet Francis and Claire felt like they were finding everything precisely in the giving up and in following the way of Christ.
Well, and Claire's, they could talk about Francis wished that all his brothers would preach by their deeds, and Claire wished that her sisters would be a mirror of the poor Christ to shine for all to see. I mean, there's a lot in that, to unpack that, to be a mirror of the poor Christ and to shine as a light for all to see. Like, what do we see when we look at the poverty of Christ? What message is that conveying? Anyway.
Yeah. So as we set out on 2021 as a community, as a congregation, trying to live into the example of Jesus, how might we think about those kinds of things that Christ calls us toward, that maybe we don't want to let go of? There's some things we may not want to let go of, but yet Christ calls us toward a better way. How in 2021 might we pursue that way, even though it feels like we are giving some things up? How do we find freedom from the things we leave behind? And now may the sacred Spirit, made known to us in Jesus Christ, go before you to show you the way.
Go behind you to push you into places you would not necessarily go yourself.
Go beside you to be your companion.
And dwell inside